Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
It's your boy Andy, and welcome back to the DeFi Slate YouTube channel. Smash the like button on this video, that really helps us out, and sit back and enjoy the content. Thank you very much.
DeFi Slate fam, welcome back to the DeFi Slate YouTube channel. This is DeFi by Design. Today we have the pleasure of talking to Cristiano from Sandclock, and we are stoked to go through Sandclock and the new levels of scalability that are reached in the merge week here. We're going to talk all about what Sandclock is doing in a DeFi new primitive. We're going to talk about how this is a spoon amongst the other DeFi forks and how all of these new primitives are available to us by the refinement and the evolution of the Ethereum blockchain and the new era of scalability that is upon us. We'll pass it over to Cristiano. How you doing today, man?
Doing great. How are you, Rob?
Good. I am stoked to talk about Sandclock. Obviously, we are gearing up for a release. I'm sure you can tell us much more about that. And let's start by going through what a primitive is. Maybe we can talk about some of the primitives that started in DeFi, you know, like what were the OG primitives? And then we can talk about how Sandclock fits into that that picture of primitives, and maybe we can touch on these money Legos and how they stack up.
Yeah, so I believe the first primitives were money markets, like Compound, 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵. Well, perhaps if we want to go a little bit deeper, we can talk about Maker as well, because not only are they technically a money market protocol, but more like a credit protocol, but they also create a stable coin, a synthetic stable coin. And well, they allow you to generate yields, and then a bunch of protocols sprung forth from this from these base components, so to speak. The first one being 𝗀, and then of course the food themed protocols. Of course, we also have synthetics and other nice projects.
Yeah, the meme coins and the food coins, you know, they were just one after another. Like, you know, I think SushiSwap started that craze by forking Uniswap, and the meme coins were like you know, a fun new narrative that they could put on the same technology to form a new brand. And then we had SushiSwap, and then all of a sudden farming and staking and auto compounding was the thing of the times, and we had yams, and then the food and we had harvest finance. That some of these projects are still around. You know, they just kind of played into that food and meme kind of branding narrative. And now there's new era primitives. You know, we had DeFi 2.0, which, you know, kind of brought in this concept of bonding curves and starting to smooth or change the bonding curve with 𝗏. And this led to, you know, a bunch of new forks on their own, like Wonderland and Time. You know, these kind of started out as new primitives where they were, you know, an initial experiment. And then once that experiment had some product market fit and that idea started to get validated, the idea started to kind of ripple throughout the entire crypto ecosystem. And, you know, there was forks of these primitives that led into new projects, but they were really just the same project with a new name. And now, you know, we talk about Sandclock. This is a new primitive. And I'm curious, you know, how is it a new primitive? How has it expanded upon the set of basic smart contracts that we got with these initial money market, decentralized exchange, and stablecoin primitives?
Yeah, so obviously everyone knows protocols like 𝗀 and such. The OG yield optimizers. We also know protocols like 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵, I believe, that allow you to stream your money. And Sandclock is kind of like a combination of both. And if I had to equate it to a real world product, it would probably be a wealth management platform. So a wealth management platform is obviously in the traditional world operated by a human or a group of humans, or obviously permission backends, and they generate a return on idle capital, and then of course periodically they allocate some of the capital to something that was predetermined when they created this foundation. We call them meta-vaults. Of course, you don't have. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility with these, but you need a lot of capital because these people need to be paid, and you also have an element of trust. So Sandclock basically removes these two elements. So it's free, it's permissionless, and it's trustless. You don't need to trust anyone. And so basically when you deposit to Sandclock, the contract will keep track of these assets, these underlying assets that you deposited. This is your initial deposit. People call it principal. And then all the yield generated from these assets is also tracked separately. And then you can do fun stuff. You can say, I want to use 20% of my yield to DCA into ETH. You can donate another percentage of your yield. You can stream it to another wallet that you want, and it streams the yield in real time. And of course, you can also subdivide and allocate your principal to whatever you want, really. But this is obviously less interesting because you can just use the blockchain if you want to send assets without going through a smart contract. You just send them. But that is Sandclock in a nutshell.
Yeah. For regular transfers, user would just send them on the blockchain, but this is to stream yield directly into a user's wallet. Or I take it a smart contract where, and that just to unpack that idea, I think it sounds like a principal is put into a vault, maybe a yield earning vault, maybe 𝗵𝗶, maybe 𝗺n. And as it starts to generate interest, that interest is streamable into maybe one wallet, maybe only the user's wallet who put up the principal collateral. And maybe this yield is streamable into, and this is all up to the user. The user can set the yield to stream into multiple wallets or some wallets and some smart contracts. And that seems really powerful, that idea where yields could stream directly into a smart contract, and the smart contract could start to do logic on what the yield that's streamed into it, how does the smart contract start to distribute that capital, could really elevate the frequency and the magnitude of compounding that capital.
And it unlocks cool stuff as well. For instance, we always talk about save, give, and invest, because these are three basic operations of I want to keep the yield, I want to donate the yield and perhaps optimize my taxes, or I want to use this yield to dollar cost average into ETH or Bitcoin or some other asset. But you can also do other fun stuff. For instance, you could build a lossless subscription service on this, where instead of charging people a $10 fee a month, you just have them deposit, let's say, $100, $200, and it just collects the yield. So all sorts of products that up until now were not possible to build are possible and quite easy to build. Other things like lossless lotteries, like Pull Together, can be very easily implemented with Sandclock by just streaming the yield to a contract that then uses VRF to run the lottery.
And tell us, for the listeners who might not be familiar with VRF, what could you kind of unpack that concept?
Yeah, so VRF is literally just getting a random number. It's never truly random, it's pseudo-random. And when you're doing lotteries on chain, there are different levels of randomness. So if you get randomness from the block, it can be it can be manipulated by the validators. Whereas if you get it from Chainlink's VRF, for instance, they probably use a much stronger level of randomness that is going to be extremely hard to manipulate. And so you can get better security assurances that there is fairness in this specific lossless lottery.
Got it. Yeah, we've talked a bit about cryptography and some of these backdoor functions that enable like higher security standards and producing randomness, and that's obviously a critical element of lotteries on chain. There's a lot of implications that oracles have when determining like some of these outcomes, and it's really cool how Sandclock provides a base layer, a platform for these other applications to start to integrate. And the applications are really endless when Sandclock starts to fit into like the rest of the decentralized financial economy. The really interesting thing that I like about Sandclock is how, one, it's a new primitive, and then two, like all of the kind of unknown possibilities that come about from introducing a new primitive to the ecosystem. And I'm curious how you kind of see our general economy, this like Ethereum nation state decentralized economy. How do you see it progressing? With the merge, and just kind of like zooming out for a bit. Now there's even more primitives that are available to us with enhanced scalability, that is intended down the line. How do you see like the decentralized economy kind of progressing overall? And
I think people will eventually, I don't think they have yet, but I think they will eventually start realizing that user experience is important. We're not just building for our own communities. We're building for, at least that's my opinion, we're building for the rest of the world. And accessibility should be a priority, and unfortunately it isn't. And so Sandclock tries to do this by building something that is incredibly powerful, generates sustainable yield, and is also easy to use by everyone. So sometimes people ask me, who would use Sandclock? What is the user persona that you have in mind? And is it non-natives? Is it natives? And my answer is always the same. It's whoever wants to generate yield and program it should use Sandclock, just because the strategies are quite advanced, and obviously they have a different risk profile, but we can talk about that in a bit. Regarding the ecosystem at large, I think, I'm really excited for the merge, obviously. That is the beginning of something really fun. I'm excited about I don't even remember the IP number, but it will make rollups much cheaper to use.
Yeah, is that
due to
Dink sharding?
Yeah, exactly. And then the sharding itself, and there's just so much. But I really do think that in the future, it's not going to be about the base layer. That is going to be something for the app makers, so to speak, to decide what kind of security assurances they want to give their users. I do think Ethereum is going to win. The rollups are going to win. But ultimately, it boils down to that, and it will be very much like a normal fintech. People are not going to be all that worried about how the yield is being generated, although you should obviously have disclaimers and a risk analysis. And I think business development is going to be key to doing this correctly, and hopefully the regulators won't put up much of a fight.
Yeah,
which is also
that is a we'll see on the regulation and how it starts to impact maybe further deeper down the stack, if we start to see some censorship at the protocol level, or if there's censorship higher up on the stack. This will obviously have an implication on user experience, accessibility, and composability between two potentially separate ecosystems. I think everyone wants to see the censorship question resolved, but it takes reflexivity from the regulators and from the White House, if you will, and these U.S. sanctions. It takes some transparency and some communication from the individuals who are making those decisions to sanction a smart contract address. And without kind of their involvement, we won't really see a resolution until it unfolds before us. And it seems like the regulators tend to work that way, where they'll just kind of let the chips fall and then react, right? Where they're just kind of like analyzing, assessing the situation, and then making some move after the fact, not really to prevent things from happening, but once there's malicious activity or intent that's discovered, that's when the regulators will come in and start to kind of make the industry safer, or according to them make the industry safer, and then according to us make it less accessible and make it more permission. Yeah. So hopefully they're somewhat forthright in that, and proactive in that in the regulation that they're putting forth.
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem with this regulation is that it's going to harm one of crypto's greatest strength, which is composability. If everything is a walled garden, it's going to be hampered, which is obviously not good. But I'm pretty excited about the most recent developments. The pack that was created recently in order to start supporting crypto-friendly politicians. That's a step in the right direction. It's something that was missing in the space. I mean, we have the deepest pockets of any industry, because obviously it's about finance, and we have the greatest incentive as well to behave this way. And we're finally doing it. We're finally aligning the incentives.
Yeah. There's more crypto representation in Congress, people running for office, the PAC that you mentioned, and even lawsuits Coinbase is supporting, I think, 6 or 7 individuals who are running a class action lawsuit against the Treasury. And yeah, this is all supported for the ecosystem, and it goes to show that we do have the deepest pockets. And now that we kind of have the attention of America and the regulators, it's time to make some change, and make it a two-way back and forth where the regulators can have a communication channel with the builders, and we can together build applications that are for the greater good, not for the malicious actors who are siphoning off the value that's created from benevolent kind of builders. And we could get into all the hacks and money that North Korean hacker groups have siphoned off of the ecosystem. But getting away from kind of the regulatory aspects of things, and kind of looking into what Ethereum is doing over time, and starting to shard, starting to scale. How is Sandclock approaching this from a application perspective? You mentioned how you expect layer 2s to be the premier application layer, where most users are actually executing transactions on these layer 2 rollups. How do you approach that from a builder's perspective? Is it
like how do we choose where to deploy?
Yeah. Like,
how do you choose
when there's so many chains out here? And this was a conversation during the layer 1 sort of frenzy. What are some of the things that stick out to you as an application developer that tell you which chain to deploy on?
Yeah. So obviously the reason why we prefer the zero knowledge rollups is precisely because of composability. They don't have that optimistic withdrawal period, which allows for liquidity fragmentation to not really be an issue. So if there's liquidity on ZK Sync and on StarkNet, you could, in theory, use a contract on mainnet to control the liquidity, the liquidity of both chains. I think this is called a DAM, which is a decentralized autonomous market maker. This concept was described in this DAM article by the Starkware team, and yeah, that is definitely a big factor, which is liquidity going to be fragmented? Are we choosing essentially, are we choosing our own prison, or are we choosing an ecosystem that is not a walled garden? So that is why, but we also plan on deploying to Arbitrum, for instance, because I think there are some good opportunities there, and it is the most popular optimistic rollup, and they are production ready, which is also very important because time is also of the essence. So these are the two main two main factors in choosing the chains that we want to deploy to. And of course, also communities help a little bit, but only at this stage, because the way things are headed, I do think that it's not going to be like the chain maxes that are going to dictate whether or not your application succeeds or dies. But yeah, that's those are the factors that we use. It's liquidity fragmentation and also popularity, and of course we cannot sacrifice security, but they're roll-ups.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally. The set layer one chains out there. Most of those are side chains. We could even start getting into some of the EVM compatible side chains. And then part of that set, a subset is going to be some of these layer twos. Some of those are optimistic, some of those are ZK, and then the benefit of these optimistic and ZK rollups, but these layer twos that, the benefit is that they actually inherit Ethereum's security model, unlike some of these other layer ones and side chains. So then, looking at kind of a best practices overview, we can concentrate on these layer twos that inherit the security, and then look deeper into like the popularity and the community behind some of these more secure roll-up methods. And then of those chains, it's really interesting now with Starkware and kind of the account abstraction and the new smart contracts that are available there. Now we can start to build independent smart contracts that share the liquidity from a base contract. And I'm curious, we've seen liquidity implementations, for example, on other chains like Solana, like Serum. Serum has this one kind of base contract. All of the LPs and the liquidity is deposited into this one contract. And then there's several front ends that interact and call this one contract to make a trade or some smart contract function. Is that similar to how these decentralized automated market makers might work in a framework like Starkware and ZK Sync both calling on the same pool of liquidity? Or is there really two pools of liquidity, and then there's a method to kind of communicate and maybe share the liquidity from one to the other?
Yeah, so I think you have a set of contracts. So you have you have a contract on StarkNet, you have a contract on ZK Sync, because it's what I used before, and then they communicate asynchronously through mainnet Ethereum. And so these contracts live on mainnet Ethereum, and they just receive the state of the dam upstream, and they need to keep delays into account just because it is asynchronous. And for instance, StarkNet is going to post proofs to L1 every second or every 12 seconds. It might vary depending on the activity. And then there is a base contract also on mainnet, which receives the states of all of these three and interacts with the actual AMM contract on layer one. So that's at least that's how they structured it, and it makes perfect sense to me. But it's nice. It's really nice because now you don't have the problem of fragmented liquidity, and you don't need bridges that are prone to failure, which evade that 7-day withdrawal period by just having liquidity on both sides and perhaps have a different security model than what you would get from a roll-up.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Stargate, how Stargate was looking to do some cross-chain liquidity provision. And it almost seemed, like they had their own bridge called Layer 0, and then depositing, into one of their Stargate LPs would kind of give you access to other LPs on other chains. And it didn't really require switching networks. You could really just deposit into these other LPs, and it seemed to handle the chain switching at the front end level. And now with Starkware and ZK Sync in this example, both rolling up to the main chain, we seem to circumvent, kind of work around this issue of having LPs siloed on different chains and then having to switch between these chains. Now we can switch between these chains from the protocol level, whereas before it might have been the front end level. Are you familiar with Stargate? Could you explain maybe the differences between how their implementation compares to
Start. I remember it, but I don't remember. I don't remember how it worked because I've never used. I mean, I have used cross-chain bridges, but let me see what kind of consensus they use.
Yeah, this was a concept that, you know, that they were able to do. It was really to capitalize on cross-chain liquidity, and it allowed users to deposit into these LPs on other chains, but it didn't allow traders or market participants on the other side of the LP to interact with these LPs from one central location. And it sounds like on Starkware, the contract, given that it's a decentralized smart contract, is one central concentrated point of the liquidity. And to me, that creates new levels of capital efficiency when we can pool liquidity together and have the benefit of less price impact when transactions are going through.
Yeah, and I also think it makes it a lot better in the sense that, you know, when you create your own rollup, like how can you attract people to build on it if you don't have liquidity? How could I create a synthetic protocol if there's no way for me to liquidate the collateral because there's no liquidity, for instance? And if we can abstract this problem away by just having this type of architecture at the base layer, now liquidity is shared between all the rollups, and you can very easily choose the L2 solution that you want based on its technical merits, as opposed to did VCs like inject a crap ton of capital into it.
Yeah, I think it also lowers the critical threshold for a lot of these applications to succeed. When, you know, people are just spinning up a new application, maybe it's a novel idea like a new token standard. There's kind of on-ramps and off-ramps to these other tokens, like Synthetics, for example, has all of these synthetic tokens. Maybe they track Nike or they track the NASDAQ or the S&P. They're pegged to these different indices. But these synthetic tokens require liquidity of their own. And, you know, for Synthetics to create its own contract and kind of silo away, it requires new VCs, new injections of capital to capitalize the synthetic tokens themselves. Whereas if there's already, say ETH liquidity on Arbitrum, and Synthetics, you know, Synthetics Plus is deploying on Optimism, you know, maybe Synthetics Plus can supply its synthetic tokens on its application, on its chain, on, say, Optimism, and it can share the liquidity of ETH on Arbitrum so that maybe someone on mainnet can swap from ETH on Arbitrum to a synthetic token on Optimism. And maybe the chain is even abstracted away where, you know, someone has ETH, they want to swap into this synthetic token. The synthetic token is on one side and it doesn't have much liquidity. The liquidity for it is on another chain. You know, that I think is a really prevalent issue in in DeFi right now, where there's a lot of tokens on maybe one chain, and this probably could even stretch to NFTs, and the liquidity for it exists on another chain, like mainnet, and the ability for a user to swap agnostically between tokens on a chain will seemingly really enhance the levels of scalability of this system, since those synthetic tokens aren't hampered by liquidity fragmentation and lack of liquidity.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside to this is that now you have kind of like a gatekeeper on mainnet, because you need to essentially whitelist which rollups get to interact with that contract and submit state updates. But if you do things right, that shouldn't be an issue. And now you're not competing for liquidity, and people can just build stuff on your chain if they think it's better in a rollup. Yeah,
and it's the idea of kind of like these like one contract for all, and then like a bunch of different front ends, for application specific purposes, or like all these front ends having their own contracts and siloing liquidity. It seems like that fragments liquidity. It doesn't really provide the capital efficiency that one base contract could, but that introduces centralization risks. Whenever there's kind of like one central choke point that could bottleneck the entire system and create gatekeepers, like you're saying. And that is important. I think as decentralization grows and kind of like the new and really as zero knowledge technology increases and grows, I think we'll start to see these problems become just solved. I think ideally, like this decentralized automated market maker could really unite the liquidity that is fragmented across the entire ecosystem now. And we see kind of...
It honestly seems to me like it's the biggest opportunity right now, because unifying the liquidity is a massive opportunity. And then this whitelisting process that must occur would just require governance.
Yeah, exactly. And it could be done in a permissionless, decentralized way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's like right now it seems like, we had all these meme exchanges and like these food coins and like, people like, that created these applications, they believe in decentralization and all this, but like ultimately they're kind of gatekeepers for their own liquidity. They're kind of like rent seekers on that liquidity, where, maybe they're managing the front end or they're managing the contract. A lot of these exchanges are taking like a protocol fee, and they're kind of renting out the liquidity, to market participants. I'm curious kind of like what your take is on rent seekers overall. And this, kind of plays into like intermediaries and how decentralized applications remove intermediaries. Are there any rent seekers you see out in the world today that are just, really ripe for disruption?
The wealth management platforms I mentioned would be one of them. But I think even in this space, you need some level of rent seeking, because it is the only way that our systems can run autonomously. Otherwise, no one's going to call the functions to make the system move on to the next state. Like a liquidation. How do you incentivize someone to liquidate a position? Because they're going to have to call that function. They're going to have to provide the debt tokens, and they're going to have to pay gas. And how do you incentivize that? You need to give them a little a little taste of something. So that is the basis of these open economic systems and ensuring that they run autonomously, especially because in crypto everything is discrete. If it only stuff happens in the blocks. If it happens between the blocks, it didn't happen really. But obviously the level of rent seeking that we do is much smaller in magnitude than what is done traditionally. And then in crypto, the costs are just lower. You don't have, I mean, some people say, Amazon Web Service, AWS, will do this 10 times cheaper than even Polygon. And that is true, but that is just one part of the equation. There are many other agents in the real world taking a cut, and then it goes to this other person who also takes a cut. You don't see that as often in this space. And everything is a lot more transparent as well, which is also another big advantage. You know where your money is going. And if you believe that that specific rent seeker is getting a lot of money, you're able to invest in them, essentially, and extract some value there as well. So yeah, I mean, it is speculatory, but I think everything is if you look close enough.
Yeah. Do you think if we had this decentralized, transparent system, maybe over the last, and this is speculation, just like you just said, everything is speculation. So I have a question that I'll pose for you to speculate on, which is that we've had this like era of money printer go burr, right? Like so much, and the evidence is inflation now. Like so much money injected into the system, in high inflation, lots of compounding and just adding money to the system, and it's growing. And that seems like leverage, where like the more just like artificial value maybe is a word for it, but like there is an element of natural value where people are contributing their time, their effort, their brain power and ideas, and creating, base level value. And then it seems like we're just compounding that same, and that maybe call that GDP growth. And then we're like compounding this like GDP growth into just like levels of magnitude never before seen, where we're injecting all this capital, and it's just expanding this base level value. Do you think if we had blockchain systems kind of like for the last 50 years, that would have prevented us from expanding this bubble? I call it a bubble, but like this expandable group of wealth, this amount of wealth, like, if it was much more transparent how much money rent seekers were making, do you think the system overall would start to draw back on that, and there would be less leverage in the system now?
Yeah, there are a couple of layers here. So for one, if it were on the blockchain, assuming that there are rules and it's not just a trusted system, assuming that the rules are almost hard coded, and let's say you have an adaptive controller on chain, and the adaptive controller does rate hikes and so on based on a specific input, and the input could be the velocity of money, for instance. Obviously, in this specific case, the system is controlled by the controller, and the controller is updated by the ones who call the functions. So you have this specific facet of the problem where it's not human making choices or a collective of humans. It is a controller, and a lot of people will shit on controllers for solving complex problems like monetary policy, but a collection of controllers would perhaps not be a bad idea. And then you have another component, which is transparency. And so even if you had a trusted party controlling the system, the fact that there is absolute transparency would allow people to move their capital very, very efficiently, because you have the equity cycles, you have the commodity cycles, and of course, even within these classes of assets, you have micro cycles, like specifically for energy, for instance. And if you know exactly where the money is going, you can escape inflation. The system would be perhaps a little bit more unstable, just because things would happen faster, but it would work much better. It would be much more efficient. And perhaps, I mean, there is no doubt that it is a much fairer system if it's transparent. Because right now, the only ones that can benefit are the ones that control it and can front run their decisions, and the ones that get allocated the surplus capital.
Yeah, and that's an inefficient system, right? Where it has the ability to front run, and creating more fairness and transparency ultimately leads to maybe a little bit less predictability, but a more efficient system where the desired output is more likely than what we have today, where it is relatively predictable. I mean, we can see, Fed is probably going to rake like 50 basis points. We can kind of predict that, but is that going to curb inflation? Like, probably not. Maybe. And in this transparent, maybe decentralized system, we might not know what this controller, this Fed controller, is going to hike rates by. Who really knows? But that is the fairness of it, where no one really knows. It's not even the individuals who built the controller, and the controller ultimately has all of the information to make a successful decision at a desired goal, which in this case seems to mean bring down inflation.
Yeah, and I mean, they use adaptive controllers on planes. So they're already being used for mission critical applications, where if an engine were to fail on a random wing, the controller on the other wing would adjust the thrust in order to stabilize the plane, so you don't just nosedive and die. So these things are already being used in production. In life or death scenarios.
Yeah, and it seems backwards to use these controllers in life or death physical scenarios, where we're kind of hesitant to use it in a theoretical scenario, but it's probably even more practical.
That's true. That's actually a good point, because they can actually validate. They don't even have to do it in a trustless way. They can just validate the output manually if they're so paranoid that it could have nefarious consequences. Yeah.
Cristiano, we've talked about a lot on this podcast. It's been great. We've talked about kind of like macro stuff, and how decentralization can make, a more macroeconomic efficient system. We talked about how liquidity is currently structured in a fragmented way, and how scalability and decentralization can unite liquidity across multiple different chains, and how this might lead application developers to choose one chain or another, more so for community or security practices, rather than whether this chain is backed by a VC or not. And we talked about how Sandclock is capitalizing on these new levels of scalability with its new primitive of streaming yield directly into a smart contract or a set of wallets, or maneuvering this yield into a stream that is completely controllable by the user, and permissionless and trustless. And we talked about how this has applications that far exceed just moving money from one place to another. There's logic that we can build into these payment streams, which can be built to the user's liking. And this really gave us a really holistic view on how Sandclock fits into not only the Ethereum state, but how Sandclock fits into like the entire macro economic state as well. And we're nearing the end of our time, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask about token go up. When token? Is there a token? If so, what is the value accrual to the token?
Yeah, so there is a token called Quartz, and the way they accrues value is, obviously you have a performance fee. The strategy is actually very smart, and has a different risk profile than what you see out there. There is an element of it could lose money, but it likely won't. And this is made very clear as well. So essentially, the performance fee obviously belongs to the DAO, but instead of just sitting there doing nothing, it gets recycled back into the vault. But instead of it being a normal deposit, it's called a sponsor. So what the sponsor does is, in the spirit of losslessness, the yield generated by this capital is distributed to all other depositors. So if people were to start withdrawing their funds, and let's say there's $10 million boosting the APY for other people, the APY would go up. So this sets a kind of like a floor for the TVL. And eventually, Quartz holders will be able to do whatever they want with this. So if we're just going to implement whatever they want. So if they want a rage quit mechanism that allows you to burn Quartz and get a slice of the protocol owned liquidity, you'll be able to do it. If you just want to point all of these yield generated by the performance fees to Quartz holders, you'll be able to do it. But I always say that a successful token starts out as a governance token, decentralizes, and then becomes something more practical, more utility based, because otherwise you just are taking on risk for no real reason. Because right now in the beginning, revenue is going to be very small until these reserves accrue yield. So why put a target on our backs by sharing revenue from day one instead of decentralizing and then just leaving it up to the DAO to decide what to do, and then we just implement it.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah. Start out with.
And the strategy is actually pretty high yield because it uses liquidity. Are you familiar with liquidity?
Their stablecoin is LUSD.
Yeah. So basically, it generates yield when their ETH goes down, because the liquidations will sell ETH to the stability pool at a discount. And then what Sandclock does is place a trailing stop loss order. And so if it rebounds, then this stop loss order will keep going up and lock in your profits. And it's very cool because it actually does very well in the bear market, but also in the bull market, because bull markets have a lot of volatility. And so I think the trailing stop loss will really shine during the bull market, whereas during the bear market, the returns will also be high simply because there are lots of liquidations. So we expect to be able to have a lot of fees accruing to quartz holders.
Awesome. Cristiano, this was an absolute pleasure. Where can our community find you on Twitter or Discord?
Yeah, so on Twitter, it would be 0x So my name, no age. And on Discord, it's just the Sandclock Discord. You guys can go on sandclock.org and just see what the link is.
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Yeah, absolute pleasure. Really looking forward to using Sandclock. This was, tons of great information, plenty of alpha stored here in this podcast. So, cheers. Thanks for coming on.